Good morning. This is Tim Stewart. I'm president at Visual Decisions, and we're here today to talk about how to create a data driven culture in your manufacturing operations. At Visual Decisions, we've been in the business of utilizing information from the shop floor to improve customer operations since about 2002. We help our customers combine the smart factory with the lean factory to drive improvements to cost, throughput, and quality. Our customers have seen dramatic improvements, such as 30% increases in OEE, 50% scrap reductions, and much more. Let's see how we do that. As a quick procedural note, if you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A. I will get to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you. So the goal for today is to see how we can build a data-driven culture within our manufacturing operations. And some of the tools that we'll be using are Industry 4.0. So we'll cover what that is and how we get people to embrace it. And let's get started. So on the right side here, we see a graphic from the World Economic Forum about the different technologies that are part of Industry 4.0. And so as we can see, there are an awful lot of them. We're going to focus on just a few today that are highly data-driven on the manufacturing floor. So for instance, there's the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, and big data that's enabling collections of vast amounts of information from the shop floor, connecting to your different machines, testing equipment, and much, much more. Advanced analytics are automating the analytic processes, providing advanced data analysis, charts, graphs, all those wonderful things. Machine learning and AI are driving greater predictive capabilities and automating problem solving. And augmented reality is used in asset and facilities maintenance, inspection activities, picking operations, and much more. And so with these different tools, you have the capability of both collecting information and using that information in ways that were never possible in the past. And all of this can create a tremendous amount of value for your operations. As we look at, again, this graphic from the World Economic Forum, we can see how much of productivity gains we can get, how much speed, time to market reduction, be able to reduce our lot sizes, higher agility, higher sustainability, et cetera. And all of this comes if you can implement these technologies successfully, but part of that is embracing it within your culture and adapting your processes to take advantage of that. And the example that I give all the time for IoT devices is a Fitbit. I've been wearing a Fitbit since 2013, so 8 years now. And I've actually gained probably 20 pounds during that time. And it's not the Fitbit's fault. I have to say the Fitbit works great. It collects all my steps, it tracks my heartbeat and so forth, can tell, if I'm sleeping or if I'm awake, it automatically senses different activities and so forth. It's cloud-based, it has, wonderful, analytics that are part of it and so forth, pretty charts and graphs. But I haven't changed my behaviors. And because I haven't changed my behaviors, I haven't lost the weight. And it's the exact same thing on the manufacturing shop floor. You can put these different technologies into place, but if your people don't change the way that they behave, if you don't build up that data-driven culture, you're not going to see the gains that you expected from your technology investment. And so how do we go about this? Well, when we're looking at Industry 4.0 and what we call Operations 4.0, which is the blending of the smart factory and the lean factory, we have a general path to success. So the first thing that we want to do is map out the vision, and we want to see, what are the different things that we want to implement, but really start with the value and work our way backwards to those things that we want to put in place. And the next step here is that we want to leverage the existing investments for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about later. And then filling those capability gaps where we do have holes in the data that we collect and so forth. We need to put systems in place to be able to fill those gaps. And then we want to integrate across the different processes so that, for instance, when we're looking at warranty information, we don't just look at the information coming from the field, but we tie that back into the manufacturing process to see what was done during manufacturing that led to warranty. And then we can tie that back even further into the design process. But throughout this entire process that we're looking at here, we have to look at every single step, how we're going to transform the culture and the process to take advantage of these new capabilities. Because again, if we don't do that, then this is basically all for naught, and we're not going to get the benefits that we expect. So as we talk about all of this, need for behavioral change and so forth, who exactly is it that needs to change? Well, the focus is always on the shop floor, whether it's the operators or the supervisors, production management, et cetera. And certainly they need to change to both, collect that data, input some of the data, utilize that information, create feedback loops on the shop floor and so forth. But they're not the only ones that need to take advantage of this and change the way that they do work. We can't forget the supporting teams out there, the manufacturing engineers, continuous improvement, the quality people, how you do maintenance and facilities work. All of them will be able to utilize this rich information that is being gathered as well, and should really change the way that they approach their jobs to take advantage of these new capabilities. Information technology certainly has to change. Traditionally, there's been a wall between IT and then OT or operational technologies. And that just can't work with this new world of Industry 4.0. We need the professionals from IT to provide governance and so forth of this rich data that's coming in from the shop floor. And they have the skill set to be able to help with all of that. So we need them to be more integrated into those manufacturing operations than they have been in the past. But most of all, management actually has to embrace and lead the change. Of course, the ultimate answer is that everybody needs to change the way that they're doing things. So the next question, now that we know who needs to change, is how much change is actually required? And I love this quote from Michelangelo, that the greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. And just as an example here, I have worked with a plastic injection molding company that had 2 plants. And the experience I had in the 2 facilities could not be much more different. The first plant was dirty, had oil under the machines, material was placed kind of haphazardly throughout the facility. It lacked flow and overall discipline, and the OEE of this equipment was around 50%. The second plant was spotless. I mean, you could immediately see the difference when you walked in the door. And it had wonderful flow from the raw materials through assembly and packaging, and had all the people actively participating in the improvement process. Their OEE was one of the highest I've ever seen at 98%. And I talked to the plant manager about the difference between the 2 facilities. He replied that the single biggest difference was expectations. He said that it took a number of years, but his outstanding results were achieved by expecting perfection out of his people at all times and setting goals that forced people to continuously strive hard for that improvement. And another way to think about this is by looking at something like the Sistine Chapel. If Michelangelo had settled for good, would great ever have been achieved? The next question is, when you're looking at something like this, how do you go about it? Do you just do a pilot and then expand from there, or do you try to do everything in one big lump sum and so forth? And I'm a big fan of going small to prove out the technology. You want to make sure that the technology itself works before you commit to it. And then once you know that, then you can go big. But the caution here is that you won't cool off if you just dip your toe into the water. You actually have to commit to it at some point. And the story I have here is with a customer that did a pilot, and they put an IoT technology, IoT platform on one of their machines. And they said that when they start getting value from that machine, then they'll roll it out across the plant. Well, the problem was that everybody kept doing their jobs the same way. I mean, the operator was initially inputting information into it, but that was just one machine that the supervisor was responsible for out of 20. And so the supervisor didn't look at that data because, well, that wasn't his process. He had a standard process that he used across all 20 machines. And since that software was just on one of them, he didn't change the way that he worked. The maintenance department didn't look at that information because that was one machine out of 200 in the plant. The quality engineers didn't look at that data. The manufacturing engineers didn't look at that data, and so forth, because it just wasn't that standard across anything. And so, since nobody had embraced this and nobody had started utilizing this information, the process itself wasn't improving. Again, it's not magic. You actually have to exercise to lose weight. The Fitbit doesn't make that happen for you. And so it kind of languished for a while. And I was finally able to, convince the plant manager that you're not going to see the improvement until you actually embrace this further. And so you don't have to put it across the entire plant, but the technology works. And so why don't you take one entire cell and put it from start to end across that cell, and then change the way that people work within that cell. And once they did that, then they could actually see the benefits of it, and were able to expand it across the plant. So what are some of the things that are standing in the way of people actually embracing this? And of course, the first thing that always stands in the way is the common human reaction to change. People just don't like change. And so how can we overcome that? Because what everybody will say is that they're already buried underneath paperwork or their daily job and so forth. And so how do you expect them to learn this new process while they're still doing everything else? And part of that is that looking at Kotter's 8 steps to change and so forth, and other change management disciplines. We're a big fan of most all of those. Specifically around building the data-driven culture, here are some of the things that we found are successful. So both develop and then communicate a vision and a strategy. Leverage what people already know. So we'll come back to that one that we talked about up front. Utilize visual controls and make sure that people are seeing that this information is being used and that it's important. Create a management operating system utilizing this data that you're collecting so that it becomes part of that normal process. And finally, use standard work for leaders so that the leaders within your organization are looking at this information and then asking questions to everybody else about that data. And that will drive them to look at the data as well so that they understand and can answer the questions when leadership asks. So let's take each one of these one by one. So in terms of developing the vision and the strategy, what we like to do is we like to start from a top-down approach and then go from the bottoms up. So what we mean by that is that we start with, what are the top level business benefits that you're looking for? Is it to increase throughput? Is it to decrease your total cost of quality? What are those top level goals that you're looking for? And once we've identified those, what are the key impediments to improving the performance from where you have it today? And then, dive down further, ask why 5 times, et cetera, until you can get down to, either a root cause level or at least something that's actionable. And once we've gone through that analysis for each one of those top level targets, then we actually have things that we can act upon. So now, what are the enablers? What are the technology pieces that we can put in place that will help us directly address those root causes of the current performance? And then define at this point up front, what are the behavioral changes? What are the process changes? What are the cultural changes that we need to make in order to drive success here. And so by identifying those things up front, along with technology selection and so forth, and tying that directly to those root causes for the current performance, now we can establish with a very high degree of confidence what we're going to do in order to get this baked into our culture, baked into our process, and drive the benefits and the outcomes that we're looking for. So once you have this plan in place, the next step is to communicate. When people don't understand what is happening, certainly they're going to be reluctant to go along. And so, if people feel like this is a one-way track to nowhere, they're probably not going to be real anxious about participating and changing the way that they do things. And so once you have that vision, make sure that you over communicate it very clearly and help people understand their role within it, how their process is going to change, and what are the things that they need to do to become successful in the new environment. And part of that is to leverage what those people already know. And so one of the tenets that we look at when we're implementing these things is to leverage the existing systems that people have in place and drive value very quickly. And by leveraging what people already know and just making use of it more effectively, you can get people on board much more easily, because you're not asking them to change as much up front, but you get them to understand that they need to do things a little bit differently. And so this helps kind of transition people into this data-driven culture without making them learn a lot of new things up front. And so part of the way to do this is to connect the existing data to value, and to utilize the information that you have to understand where performance is falling short, target where to invest time for the improvement team, create optimal improvement portfolio, fix the right problems, et cetera. Respond faster when you have issues on the floor, and utilize the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is that people behave differently when they know they're being watched. When there's a policeman on the side of the road, people slow down. When the plant manager's out on the shop floor, people speed up. And so by utilizing the Hawthorne effect, what you can do is you can put visual metrics on the shop floor to focus different behaviors. Working with a manufacturer of small screws and connectors, they had very poor performance on second shift because there was no supervisor there. But they put some big TVs out on the shop floor that just showed this information, and they were able to significantly improve the performance of the operation just by people seeing that, hey, what we're doing is actually being observed and noted, and then just having conversations from management to the team leads and so forth on those shifts of what that performance looked like the day before. And so those things can be very effective in terms of driving better performance. You don't need a whole lot of data to get started. So we were working with a company up in Minnesota that just had very basic information about what was planned and then what was actually built by a different department. And that was really it. And so some of the things that we were able to put together for them were schedule adherence, overall production numbers, and be able to make that very graphical so that people could see whether they were meeting targets, exceeding targets, or falling short. And just by doing that, we were able to drive certain behaviors that we were looking for, and at least get people used to looking at the data. And then we were able to put other things in place to collect more granular data so that we could identify root causes of performance and just really address those and build up a more success afterwards. But taking that first step of getting people used to the idea of directing their behaviors and what they do on a daily basis based on the information was a big step that didn't require much investment whatsoever. I've talked about using visual controls and how that can lead into the Hawthorne effect and so forth. And one thing I'll say here is that while manufacturing has really embraced technology and automation, continuous improvement has not in many cases. And, you know, a lot of the things that we thought were very futuristic, 10, 15, 20 years ago, lasers and robots and cobots and augmented reality and many other things, you know, they seem like they were science fiction back then and so forth. But, today you can hardly walk through a factory without seeing a lot of those different things. Um, but we're still using a lot of whiteboards. We're still, handwriting things on those whiteboards. We're still using tick sheets, at the line and so forth. And there are a lot of opportunities to automate those things and eliminate a lot of waste that's associated with these manual boards and so forth. You can also drive a higher level of engagement and analysis by incorporating new capabilities into standard work. So right now, the standard work is built around, how do we actually, get people to walk over to the board, walk over to the paste board and write in, how many pieces were expected, how many were actually made, and, reasons for misses and things like that. And what you have the capability of, if you automate that data collection and data presentation, is actually a higher level of interactivity if you build the right standard work around it. So instead of having people, have excess motion and everything else to go to the board, you can replicate displays in as many places in the shop floor as you want, so that people don't have to, walk over to it. But then you can also have them, instead of writing that information down and tracking it themselves, utilize that same amount of time to use that information to improve the process itself. And so now you can get them actually a deeper understanding, and you can get them broader context of the information and so forth, so that they can utilize that information in different ways. So Taiichi Ono once said that, the entire goal of lean manufacturing is to create thinking workers. And, this is a great way to go about that in terms of being able to provide that broader context, deeper levels of information, and have them actually use that information to improve the process itself. And so, one of the key summary points here is that, you need to be data driven. This is Industry 4.0 that we're talking about, and how we utilize all of this information. And so trying to be data driven in all of your different activities across your different departments and so forth is really a key to making all of this work. And the performance metrics that you collect should align to the different processes. So for total quality management, you should be collecting information that feeds into that. For your TPM process, whether it's supporting autonomous maintenance or planned maintenance or predictive, you should be collecting information that helps support those different activities and shows the success of different programs and so forth. Same thing with OEE, Six Sigma, et cetera. One of the key things that I talk about with my customers is to create that continuous focus on value. How do you actually dollarize the information that is being displayed on the shop floor, so that people know not only, hey, I had 20 minutes of downtime, but what did that 20 minutes of downtime cost? And so, as you're looking at variances in setup time between different operators and so forth, how can you actually track that and communicate what the value of that time difference is to the people that are involved? And I've worked with plant managers that took it a step further, and rather than talking about $70,000, talked about that being 2 Ford F-150 pickup trucks, and how many different vehicles and so forth were being lost each day based on scrap and downtime, et cetera, and try to put that into real terms that people can really understand, instead of this kind of figurative amount of, well, we had 210 minutes of downtime. Well, what does that really mean? And so being able to contextualize that information this way helps people really understand what are the real costs of these different events that are happening on the shop floor. Talked about a digital management operating system, and so how do we look at that? If you're familiar with lean manufacturing, you've probably seen one of these X matrices that goes through and looks at policy deployment, or Hoshin-Conry, and really guides what are the long-term objectives into what are we doing this year, into what are we doing this quarter, and then who's responsible for it, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve, and so forth. And so what are the critical metrics that we're trying to look at within those? And what I've worked on with customers is to really digitize that. How do we collect that information directly from the shop floor and then feed that into a management process? And so this is something that we've developed and worked with a number of COOs on across different companies, where we pull this information directly from the shop floor, and then we pull this into a variety of different tools and so forth that I've worked on with different customers. And this shows for each one of those KPIs, what is the real-time status of that KPI for the current time period, so that we can have people not only get a weekly or a monthly view of this, but understand where they stand right now. And then where we have misses, we can actually track what was the reason for that miss, and what corrective actions are being taken, and then look back at those corrective actions to see how effective they were in driving that performance improvement. And so those capabilities really help drive that cadence coming from the COO, going down through the plant managers, down to the shop floor, of what are all of those things that we want to focus on a daily, weekly basis, and really helps drive that culture within the organization to look at the data and base decisions off of that information. This helps us actually transform operational excellence as a whole. And so I won't go into a lot of detail here. I've got a number of presentations that are available on the website at visualdecisions.com that go through how do we transform operational excellence. And for lean management system, it's that standard work for leaders that we'll talk about in a minute. It's the visual controls, making Gemba more effective. And I'll talk about that in a little while also. The management operating system, the daily accountability process, but it's also the lean toolkit itself. Kaizen, how do you make Kaizen more targeted? How do you do better root cause analysis? How do you automate value stream mapping and failure mode and effect analysis? And all of those other tools within the lean toolkit are almost all very highly data-based. And so how do you take the information directly from the process and utilize it within those lean tools, as opposed to using sticky notes on a wall? And so looking at Kaizen in particular here, here's a typical 6-step type of process, and data can really help improve the Kaizen process at every single one of these different steps. And so I've been in way too many plants where Kaizens were primarily run on whoever was complaining the loudest or whatever machine went down last. And rather than using those things to drive where we're investing in improvement, if we actually understand where the data is telling us are the most costly systemic issues, we can put our continuous improvement team to break those constraints within our factories. And so if we utilize the information, the data, to identify those problems up front, we can make significant gains in how effective our continuous improvement program actually is. Analyzing the current process, I'll talk about root cause analysis in a minute, but nobody disagrees with me that data helps there. Creating solutions and being able to, for instance, expand the solution space with this information of what can be done, and then testing those solutions, maybe simulating things in advance of making capital investments and so forth. Measuring and analyzing the results, and then standardizing the solution. The technology itself can help standardize the new work practices as you roll those out across an organization. And going deeper into the root cause analysis, whether you're doing something as basic as when we have problems, who's running the process, what is the actual problem, when does it occur, where in the process is it happening, and then, why is it happening, and so forth. Or doing a 5 why, or, kind of putting that into an Ishikawa diagram, or doing a graphical evaluation of the data, going through a full factory or failure modes and effects analysis, or, going into the Six Sigma tools with statistical analysis of factors, whether it's in ANOVA or a design of experiments, et cetera. Data is going to fundamentally help you across any of these different activities. Standard work for leaders. This is one that I cannot emphasize enough, is that leadership, if they embrace these tools and if they actually utilize the information in their daily processes, it will get adopted, all the way down through the organization. So talking about this a little bit, the concept of standard work for operators is very well known. Benefits are, fairly obvious to everyone. However, the concept of standard work for leaders is not as often discussed. And the following are some examples of, what a leader could have as standard work items on a daily basis, and how those could actually, feed into this whole process of data. First of all, reviewing the performance trends. Leadership should be aware of, what's happening within the plant at all times. They should understand what the data is telling them, and they should look at that data to see, where the performance gap is, whether that's as simple as, comparing earned hours to standard hours, or understanding really what are the drivers behind that, and understanding where the scrap is happening, not just how much, but where it's happening and why. Being able to spot check and sign off on various visual controls as they're doing their Gemba walks through each value stream, and so forth. Leading the weekly plant performance and improvement review meeting, and so forth, and being able to utilize the data as we talked about with the Kaizen and root cause analysis, and so forth. Being able to kind of review the process and product improvement work, verifying the leaders underneath them standard work, and verifying the team leaders and supervisors on the floor, and the work that they're doing, and so forth, and how are they looking at the information to actually improve their process. And so if each level within the organization is talking about the data to the level beneath them, and asking questions, and expecting that they're going to understand that, and if not, helping them to understand that information, and so forth, then that will drive that culture throughout the entire organization. And part of this leads into a daily accountability process, or kind of a checklist approach to doing your work, where you have the ability to just go through that list every single day and make sure that you're checking those things, checking the data, checking the process, checking the results, and if you see anomalies, talking to people about that, and having them help you understand what were the drivers behind all of that, and then taking action to fix it. And one last word on management here. Another quote from this time Gandhi: you must be the change that you wish to see in the world. And if management wants people on the shop floor to be much more data driven, they should themselves be much more data driven. So what else can be done to drive success? These are just kind of smaller points, but look at improvement across different time horizons. So on a shift by shift basis, being able to react quickly as things are happening on the shop floor, and being able to make sure that small problems don't become big ones is very critical. But in addition to fighting those fires and putting those fires out, you want to be able to shift to kind of a weekly or a monthly time perspective as well, and look at those larger trends and say, what are the systemic issues that are here within the plant, and be able to let the data lead you to those things that you need to solve that will make a much bigger difference typically within the overall performance. There's a tendency to just stick band-aids on something, and the example I give here all the time is that I was in a shampoo bottling plant, and they had this overhead conveyor that fed bottles to the filler. And when I was looking at the data on the filler, I would see that the filler would stop every 15, 20 minutes for like 1 or 2 minutes, and then it would restart. So I was curious. So I went out to the line to see what was actually happening. And what I saw was that every 15, 20 minutes, there would be a bottle that would tip over in that overhead conveyor. And the operator was usually at a different part of the line and so forth. It was a fairly long line. And by the time that they noticed it, the filler had usually been down for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, somewhere in there. The operator had to walk over, grab a broomstick, and then poke at that bottle that had fallen over until it cleared and the feed started again. And so I talked to the operator and said, how often do you have to do that? And he said, well, that's just the way that the line works. And so then we grabbed the supervisor, had the supervisor and the process engineer come over, sit there and watch with me and watch the bottle fall a couple of times. And then, talked about, well, we can do one of two things here. We can either fix this, or we can get some tape and kind of tape off on the floor where this broom is kept, because obviously it's a piece of standard equipment for the line. And they got the point, and we actually were able to just put some silicone tape on a join between two guide rails, and the bottles didn't fall there anymore. And we got rid of probably 40 minutes a day of downtime on that line, just from doing that one fix with 30 cents of materials to fix it. And so, that isn't the end of the story, though, because after a while that silicone tape wears out. So rather than just sticking with that temporary fix, eventually what we did was we went up and actually adjusted the guide rail so that on a more permanent basis, that fix was in place, and that problem wouldn't crop back up in the future. One of the questions that I'm often asked about all of this is, when you have these displays, does that replace Gemba? And my answer is, of course it doesn't. What it does is it helps make Gemba much more effective. So as management is walking around the plant, rather than just looking at what's happening at that current time, they can actually bring a tablet with them and look at how the performance has happened throughout the day, see how much scrap has been generated at that process, how much downtime has there been, and they can make their Gemba walks much more informative by looking at that information about each process as they go. And so you shouldn't stop doing Gemba walks. If anything, you should do more, but do them more effectively by utilizing the information that's available. And finally, the book is actually kind of just okay, but there's a quote that I really like from it, which is that there's an adage that holds true in this discussion. We don't think ourselves into a new way of acting. We act ourselves into a new way of thinking. And so, as you set up standard work around, all of these different practices that I've been talking about, whether it's, on the shop floor, for leadership, for the support teams, et cetera, if you just change the way that the job is done and you start going through those daily accountability processes, those checklists and so forth that utilize this information, you will act yourselves into a new way of thinking instead of just trying to think yourselves and remind yourself to do it. Just have that checklist and drive those behaviors. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today. And if you have questions, please reach out to me at tim@visualdecisions.com, or my phone number there. And I look forward to talking with you all in the future about this topic. Thank you.